Hello, TCI family, Jonathan's Refuge, and all of our friends and family. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Tonight at 7 p.m. in Marysville at the church there is our weekly church in Marysville. And that is at 6 to 7 is a dinner. So it's just, if you don't have anything to bring, just come. We got plenty. It's a potluck. If you have something to bring something. If you don't, you can always swing into Safeway and grab a hot and ready meal or a chicken for $7 or a pizza for $10 or something. But we just get together for an hour, eat food, fellowship, talk about our weeks. Sometimes there's very emotional moments, and sometimes there's very fun and filled with laughter, but it's always a blessing. And then from 7 to 7:15 tonight, we'll have a quick message. So let's get into that message. Here it is. So the message we've been going through is that of the life of King David. And King David was on a road. It's titled, the message, The Road to Zion 2.0. The Road to Zion was a message. It was my birth father's life's work, this message. And it started from the life of David when he was a boy in Bethlehem, and then moving to the fields that we all learned, right, where he was the shepherd and taking care of his father's sheep, which the sheep would all be together in one spot with the shepherd. And if you know anything about sheep and shepherding, they poo everywhere. So you're walking around in sandals, because they had sandals at the time, and you're up to your ankles in poop. And you've got to fend off against mountain lions and bears and tigers. This is a pretty amazing thing, and most people doing that job were between the ages of 10 and 15. So then we go through David's life, which then got transformed when God said that he would be another king of this place, right? The prophet came and told him that God said this. And then he goes to the Goliath to bring food to his older brothers, the 7 older brothers. And that's when David and Goliath, the famous story where David took a slingshot and hit Goliath in the forehead and boop, kills him, takes his sword, chops off his head, and became the legend that he was, right? That's what we've been dealing with. And then he got the hand of the king's daughter for winning. And then as we get into this, we then see how David then became the warrior for the kingdom, and then how the king turned on him, right? And then after the king turning on him and all the years of that, the king finally dies. Saul finally dies. And then David is recognized as the king. They say he was made king, but we're going to get into that. So I want to start with actually, we left off where David was in the caves of Adullam, which is a place, a stronghold where men that were outlaws went. So if you were an outlaw, this was a place for you to go. It was a place that you could defend yourself. It was a defensible area. It didn't matter if it was a tribe coming from the north, the south, the east, or the west. It was pretty good defense. And then it also allowed you a great offense, and it had things that allowed you to be able to feed and eat the people in your tribe. So he's hiding here from the king on the run, and he's there in those caves for almost, 8 years, ballpark? 8 years on the run as an outlaw? So we look at the life of David, and let's break it down. That's where we left you guys, right? He had almost killed the king. He got down and cut a piece of the robe off when the king was sleeping in a cave. And David snuck in a back entrance to that cave that no one knew about. His guards didn't even check it properly. And so the king could have died. But David spared his life. He spared his life many times. I don't get that. So let's look at this, because right now what we're doing is we're ending with the king is dead and David is 30 years old. He is in the caves of Adullam and that region over there, and he's about to head to a city, and that city is called Hebron, and he's to be made king. And he's now 30 years old. Remember, the average lifespan of an Israelite at that time in history, and anyone for that matter in the Mediterranean, lived into their 30s, and that was your wise men. If you were in your 30s, you were the wise man. Well, you got to remember, King David, he lived to be king. He died at the age of 70. He took king at 30, so that means he reigned for 40 years. That's 10 years more than most people even live. Okay, so David, let's start off real in the beginning here. David goes to Hebron to become king. He is made king, it says. Was he made king in Hebron? Because Saul died, and the kingdom of Judah said, we want David. He's the guy, right? Saul and his son Jonathan both died in a battle. So Jonathan couldn't take over. There were descendants of Saul's families. Jonathan's son, he could have, Mephibosheth should have held claim to the throne, but they all ran and went off. And so here's David, and he's in this city, Hebron, and they come to him and say, we want to make you king. And so he accepts. But I don't say he was made king. You see, the Bible said made king, but the Bible's, I'm sorry, it's written by a man, many men actually, and it's flawed. I've got the original one sitting on one of my shelves right over here. It's the King James Version, the first one ever made. It originally started in Hebrew, the Bible, and then you got Greek, and then you got Aramaic, and then it was translated each time, right? And so it's been translated, and then it went from that to Latin, and then our Latin got transferred to the English, and the King of England, okay, he went ahead and made the Bible publishable in English so the educated man could read it. And so it's been changed the wording's changed. There are things that are in the Bible right now that were not in the Bible. Like as an example, the word sin was never in the Bible. It actually was a different word used. The word sin actually in the Bible, the original one used when Jesus said, go and sin no more, that word sin actually meant go and miss the mark no more. So it's a little different. They sure made it look pretty hairy and scary. The word hell was not in the Bible, by the way. The word hell was not in the Bible. That's an English word. But that's for another sermon. So here we go. We've passed this message down. They say that he was made king. But I don't agree. I say he was actually recognized as king. Where was David actually made king? It's back in the field, the first story. If you guys haven't watched it, go back. The last few weeks we've been doing the story of David, okay? And it was when he was in the shepherd's field. Because here's the thing. He wasn't made king in Hebron. He was made king in a field of poo, tending to his father's sheep. Now, I don't know about you, but when your 7 brothers run off to war, don't you want to go run off with them? You're 15. You've killed a bear, a lion, tigers. These are things you've killed with a sling, a javelin, a knife, and your bare hands. You are a warrior's warrior. But David was faithful to his father's job that he gave him. The job of tending to the flock. Being a shepherd. That's what a pastor is. A pastor is a shepherd. And sometimes David had that staff. You guys seen it. It's the straight staff and it's got the little crook on it. It's the shepherd's staff. The staff was made for many reasons. You would take the hook of it and grab the neck around a sheep to pull it away from a cliff or danger, away from a snake or something that you saw. Or that sheep keeps wandering off. So you know what they would take the other end of the stick and do? They'd break this little bone in the back of their heel. And it hurt. But they could still walk, but they walked with pain. So after multiple times of bringing them back to the herd, they won't ever wander off again. They had to break that little bone. Wow, that sounds like mom and dads and pastors and leaders. So he learned to be a king in a field of poo is when he became the beginnings of a kingship, the road to a kingship. So he was faithful in the little. Then his years as a warrior. Now, keep in mind, 0 to 15, he's in Bethlehem. That's what he did. Now, 15 to 22. 15, he heads off to fight Goliath, fights him, wins the king's daughter in marriage, and becomes the celebrity of the region. And people are already talking, did you guys hear that the prophet said he's the next king, even though Saul's the king? That's a little complicated, isn't it? Doesn't Jonathan, Saul's oldest son, take the kingship? Okay. And then David wants to be faithful to his king, like he was to his father, a lesson he learned in the youth. And then he becomes the most faithful warrior for the king, slaying thousands of people. And again, I'm not promoting killing, by the way. And I know the Bible says they killed in God's name. They didn't. They killed in their own name, in their tribe name. God never has ordained the death of a person. The deity, the creator, does not sanction the death of any of his creatures. No one denomination, faith, book, person, gender has that power. We are all one child of the universe. That is what I refer to as God. So here's David, and he's now a warrior from 15 to 22, and he's the most celebrated. This guy is the rock star of his age. He would be the equivalent of if you took the Rolling Stones, Johnny Cash, the Beatles, flash forward and grab some celebrities from this era, your Jay-Z's, whoever the biggest swinging guys and gals are, the Beyoncés. Okay, you get all of those, roll them up. That was David. Okay, when he came into the city, they were singing, Saul, the king, has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. He was between 15 and 22 doing this, by the way. Now he's 22 years old, and he has to go on the run. So, what's interesting is then his years as hunted prey began. 8 long years of being wanted for a crime he never committed. Being persecuted, chased down, and attempted murder on his life multiple times for something he never did. He was faithful. Now, I don't know about you, but I'll be honest with you. When I first studied this as a young man, I told my father, there's no way in Hades that I would let that bum push me around for even 2 years. I'd give it a year or two, I ain't gonna lie, because, I want to be faithful. After 2? Seriously? But no, David spent 8 years. He could have killed him. He could have assumed the throne. Peace and harmony prevailed. How many people could have lived through all the people that got killed in trying to kill David? Think about that for a second. He could have justified it, but he didn't. He said, I'm just going to be a faithful servant, faithful, trustworthy, a warrior. He learned servanthood, faithfulness, trustworthiness, and a warrior. He learned all of that before he was 15 years of age. Then he spent the next 7 years becoming a master warrior in the making. And then as an outlaw, that's where everything changes. So what's interesting is then he was hunted by prey by his father-in-law, the king. He built a relationship with Jonathan, the king's son, the prince, the next heir, that models for us how we have the chance to have amazing relationships with people. Jonathan and David, had they not had that intimate relationship, David probably would have died. So it's a covenant relationship. And there's a whole message on covenant relationship and friendships and building and amassing tribes and families and communities that comes from that. But I want you to understand this. We're trying to get a big picture right now. So David, again, for 8 years, 22 to 30, he spent on the run. And instead of killing the man, he chose peaceful solutions. Now that's interesting. So he learned how to be a servant, faithful, trustworthy, and a warrior when he was 15. He went to battle when Goliath, right, at 15. And the world recognized that he was a warrior. He wasn't made a warrior then. He was made it in the field. He just was recognized then. Then he spends 8 years on the run. And then Saul and Jonathan die in a battle from enemies from other countries in a foreign war. And David goes to Hebron, and they come down and make him king at 30. They just recognized him. He was already king. But he had traits of people that weren't even alive back then. So I like to actually say, working backwards, forwards, that the Buddha learned from David, Christ learned from the Buddha, Mahatma Gandhi learned from all of them. Here's what's amazing. These are amazing names I just mentioned. King David, Buddha, Christ, Mahatma Gandhi. Buddha, well, let's start with the first one, Mahatma Gandhi. He was the last, 100 years ago, right? We're talking the 20th century, just the last 100 years. And then before him, 2,000 years was Christ, right? He walked the earth. And then 500 years, roughly, before Christ was the Buddha. And then 500 years before the Buddha was David. Now, I'm going to spin some things real quick, so just follow me and listen. Here's Mahatma Gandhi. His 4 points really revolve around this: nonviolence, individualism, soul force, and forgiveness. He searched for truth. He trusted in God. He had no secrecy. He had self-sacrifice, no defeatism, and trust, leadership, and he was at peace with his work. So these are traits that made him, if you summarized the man Mahatma Gandhi, who changed the world for nonviolence, and how you can actually change the world with nonviolence, even though some say you can't do that anymore. I disagree. I believe we are on the verge of showing the world through our church and our foundation and our organization that we can unite. That a gangster who's known as one of the most ruthless people can actually become a peaceful man and help bring peace. So if it can happen to me, it can happen to you. It can happen to, the president. It can happen to anybody. It can happen to the kings of countries. We have to believe like Gandhi did. We must look at those 4 truths real quick. He searched for truth. He trusted in God. Very explanatory. No secrecy is simple. There was no secret. There's no mysteries. If you guys want to know, there's no secret to it. He self-sacrificed. He had to give of himself. These are the things David, by the way, modeled. And these men actually talk about how David modeled some of these traits to them. And then no defeatism. You guys know my stance, right? How you doing? I'm fantastic. Aren't you going in for like 2 surgeries at the end of the month or something? Yeah. That's it. I'm excited. It's going to be the first time in history of my life that I'll go in for this surgery and not come out telling me I have cancer. So I'm stoked. No defeatism here, baby. 8 years in the caves of Adullam on the run, being hunted like a dog. 8 years. And David? No defeatism. He trusted. I like what Gandhi said. He trusted. He says, take them at their word until they prove you wrong. Trust everybody until they prove you wrong. And then he says, I can associate with anyone, and I can deassociate just as fast. So if they prove to be not trustworthy, deassociate. And then the problem's solved. No issues. Now, let's go ahead and look at another leader, and his name was the Buddha. Well, we've talked a lot about Christ, and so that's why some might say, why are you skipping Christ? Again, we all know the teachings of the Christ. We've talked about a lot of them, but a lot of people that I speak to in the Christian world, as an example, don't know a lot about the Buddha or about people like Mahatma Gandhi. And so I want to talk a little bit about the Buddha today. The Buddha had 5 precepts. When I became a Buddhist, which is not a religion, by the way, it's a philosophy, you take these things called the 5 precepts. And it's kind of like when you join a faith. There's a creed that most people have you sign. And the 5 principles that the Buddha followed were from the Taoism. It says this: I observe refraining from killing living beings. I refrain from taking and stealing what is not mine. I refrain from committing sexual misconduct. I refrain from telling lies. I will not take any intoxicants or drugs. It kind of sounds like the 10 Commandments that we have in the Bible about another 1,500 years or so, 2,000 years before the Buddha, right? But if you look at these traits in the different people, some of them were from each other. You can see the Buddha and David had nothing in common when it came to killing living beings. David killed a lot of people. So he definitely failed to precept number 1. But he never stole. So he followed that precept. Committing sexual misconduct. He did, actually. He had an affair that was epic that we're going to learn about a little later as he was king in a few weeks. So my point to you is these are some past people. But modern day time has a guy named John Maxwell. And John Maxwell, as I close this, he works in a field of leadership. He is actually known, Dr. John Maxwell is known as America's expert on leadership, now a global expert on leadership. I worked with John at his church. I did a lot of private meetings with Dr. Maxwell in organizations but I'm not like a personal buddy with John, okay? My dad sent me down to his church to attend it in San Diego when he was there, and I learned at all these meetings he would have and just listen and take notes. And I did that, and I sat under a beautiful man. Now here's what's interesting. That church, when I met him, that was the largest church in the Wesleyan denomination. So he rose to the top of the ranks. But he started at the bottom, in the field, in the poo, in a little tiny country church, the same kind of church that I first pastored, a little tiny one, and it was a tiny little community. And if you read his book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, you will see that his book, which he has made him world famous, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, all those 21 laws, this man started to learn all of them while he was in the field, in the poo. He mastered them out there, learned them there, and then was able to bring him to the world. And what he did is he could have gone out earlier. He could have left the church a long time ago. His dad was a superintendent, which means he oversaw many churches like a bishop, okay? He's like a bishop. Kind of like myself, where you oversee different ministries and pastors and churches. Okay, that's what his father was. He went to the top of the ranks on his own merit. And then there came a moment when all of a sudden the President of the United States is calling Dr. Maxwell to do the leadership conferences at the Navy academies, and he's bringing him in to lecture himself and his staff, and Congress and Senate, Republicans, Democrats, presidents who have been Democrats and Republicans, NFL, NBA, CEOs, Coca-Cola, that's their number one leadership expert that comes in and teaches all of their people, global enterprises, General Electrics, countries, kingdoms, bring this man in. But like David, he started in the field with the poo. Are you in the field right now getting upset? I'm better looking than that model. I should get the shot. He didn't deserve to get that shot in that ad. I'm a stronger guy than that bodybuilder. I should have got picked. Are you griping, or are you staying faithful in the field that you were in? Are you being chased for something you didn't do? And are you going to bitch about it and complain? No. We're going to do like David. We're going to be faithful. We're going to be upbeat. We're going to be positive. We're going to be learning how to become a manager. See, when David was in the field, here's the things that David learned. David learned a lot of things. David learned how to become a leader, logistics, management, fatherhood, being humble, faithfulness, CEO, mastering the warrior, and becoming a king. And he did all of that between the ages of 1 and 30 before he was actually made king. And that's what John Maxwell did. That's what Mahatma Gandhi did. That's what Christ did. That's what the Buddha did. That's what we are trying to do as a church. So I close on that. I am so excited that everyone is learning from this life called the King David life, or the life of King David. And as, like I said, my father taught this his entire life. This was his main themed message, and many messages come off of it, as they have in my own messages. But David and Buddha and Christ, the Christ, which means the anointed one, and Mahatma Gandhi, and John Maxwell, and all of these people, they just want the best for us. And if we can focus on these simple traits, right? The road to Zion, the poo first, and learning all of the things we master. And then there's this slowly, you see it climbing up, and then all of a sudden, David's a rock star. Dr. Maxwell's a celebrity. You follow me? Mahatma Gandhi, who? Boop! One of the largest leaders ever in the world for peace movements. Christ, who is he? He didn't even show up on the scene until he was 30, and then everything he did it in 3 years. Bam! So there's this curve starting from the poo field, and you learn and learn and learn and learn, and you might not even go up. A little, and then all of a sudden, bang, compounding interest for all your years of working and being faithful and being a servant and being a man who is never putting his needs above the others. And in doing so, you are in demand. The outlaws will come to you like they went to David. And those outlaws, by the way, now that he's king, we're going to learn what happens to those outlaws. What happens to the outlaws in the new kingdom with David? Does David avenge the acts that were caused against him and kill off all of Saul's family? I don't know. We'll find out next week. Tune in. I love you guys. God bless.